What's up, everybody? It's Terrence. Okay, before we get going, I want to try something real quick because I read on the internet that this might actually work. So let's try. Go ahead and turn to the person on your right and ask them any question you want, any question. And if you can't think of a question, here are a few on the screen just in case you can't think of anything, which I think you should be able to think of something. But anyway, okay, ready, go. Okay. Up here. I hope that was fun. Bring it back real quick. Land the plane, roll the credits, sound the buzzer, conversation is over. I got something to say. So how did that go? Sometimes it's easy to get to know someone like through asking questions. But other times learning about someone or something new doesn't always come so easy, does it? It's kind of like school. Not every subject is as easy for all of us to understand right away. Sometimes it takes a question or two to really get it. Trust me, I felt that way a lot in middle school. In fact, now you wouldn't know it by looking at this strong, young, handsome, intelligent man today, but in middle school, it wasn't quite that way. To tell you the truth, up until about 7th grade, all of my grades were pretty much A's. Every now and then I got a few B's, but then I met Mr. Pope. Yes, Mr. Pope, 7th grade algebra, and this man was the real deal. In fact, I had so much trouble with algebra. All the numbers became letters and letters became numbers, and it made no sense to me. And so I even ended up getting a D my first 6 weeks of my class because I just could not understand it at all. And I was so frustrated because everything I had done up until that point, I was great at. And everything came easy to me until I met Mr. Pope in 7th grade algebra. Now, it was frustrating to me. And we've all been there, right? Unless you're a super genius, you've probably encountered at least one subject in school that has been really hard for you to understand. Some of us get so frustrated when that happens that we decide to quit trying. We decide we're never gonna get it. So what's the point even trying to learn it or to even do it anyway? Doesn't really matter. Others of us decide to keep going. If we can't understand something on our own, we start asking questions. Just like you learn and getting to know someone new today, your questions are important. They have a way of helping you learn new things, and sometimes we wait for someone else to ask questions for us so it doesn't look like we don't have all the answers. Trust me, I know what that looks like because I remember not wanting to be the kid asking the dumb question in the middle of 7th grade algebra. And the truth is, isn't it funny how we have no problem showing off the stuff we know in class, but the minute we aren't sure about something, we hesitate to ask? It's almost like we think our questions make us look bad in some way. Honestly, some of you probably feel the same way here at church sometimes. You come here to learn about God and maybe even try to connect with Him in a new way, but so much of what we talk about leaves you feeling less like you're growing in faith and more like you're not sure about faith. In other words, you have questions. Maybe you show up at church and really want to understand this whole faith thing, but none of it feels logical. I mean, let's be real. The whole world created in 7 days. Is that? Yeah. Snakes that talk and walk, apparently. Sick people being healed? Sure, that sounds like a real cool story. Those sound like cool stories, but to you, they just don't make a lot of sense. You've got questions and maybe even doubts about some of the things we talk about here at church, but you feel like you can't speak up and actually ask them. And I've been there too. I know what that feels like. Why? Well, for some of you, you're worried that asking those questions might make you look bad. To your small group leader, or even to God. After all, a person who has faith and comes to church every single week wouldn't ask questions, right? Others of you might not want to ask your questions because you think they're dumb questions. Maybe you think the things you aren't sure about are things that you should already know. And you probably think you're the only one asking those questions. You don't want to look silly by speaking up and actually asking them, right? Or maybe you're not asking simply because you don't know who to ask. You want to have a conversation about some of the doubts and questions you have when it comes to this whole faith thing, but you're not sure who to talk to about it. No matter where you are with all this faith stuff or what kinds of questions you may have, let me let you in on a little secret. You're not the only one. Yes, that's right, you're not. Big or small, we've all got questions when it comes to our faith. And honestly, that's not a bad thing at all. If learning about and connecting with God is the most important thing we can do in our lives, and believe me, I think it is, then I think we have to ask those questions. It's part of the process. And a great place to start learning about and connecting with God is through an incredible book that documents the relationship between God and humans. The Bible. There's a book in the Bible called Mark, and in it, we get a picture of what God is looking for when we try to connect with him. After being questioned by the religious leaders of the time about what was the most important thing in our faith, Jesus replied with these words: "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength." So what did Jesus say? It's all about love. When we try to connect with God, the most important thing is to love him with our hearts, souls, minds, and strength. Hearts, souls, minds, and strength. Well, part of loving God with our minds is taking the time to learn about him, to ask the questions we have as a way to grow our faith in him. You see, learning about God is a way to connect with God. And part of learning is asking. And you might be thinking, well, it's easy to get to know someone who is standing right in front of me or beside me or behind me, but it's a whole other story when it comes to God. How am I supposed to learn more about him when I have so many questions? I don't even know where to start. The good news is we're not the only ones who have had questions about God and all this faith stuff. The Bible is actually full of people who spent a lot of time questioning the things they heard about God. In fact, when Jesus was on earth, he spent a lot of time teaching and answering questions people had about who he was and the message he had for the world. In the book of John, a book written actually by one of Jesus' closest followers and friends, we get a glimpse at a time when Jesus was doing just that, answering a lot of questions. He was speaking to a group of people who had a question after question after question after question about all kinds of things. And these people were called the Pharisees. And they had a whole lot of trouble believing everything Jesus said about who he was and what he'd come to do. They spent their lives following a bunch of rules and laws of religion, rules and laws that Jesus seemed to be changing or challenging with everything that he said. And so needless to say, these guys had questions. They wanted to know how it was possible that Jesus could be both God and man. They wanted to know who his father was. They wanted to know what he meant by some of the things he said would happen to him on earth. They wanted to know who he really was. And what's interesting about this exchange is that Jesus never shut them down. He was never like, no, dumb question. Nope, dumb question. You can't ask that. That is not a good question, sir. The more they asked, in fact, the more questions they asked, the more answers he gave. He wasn't afraid of their questions. It doesn't seem like he got mad or frustrated that they asked. He knew that they were trying to trick or trap him to even catch him unable to give an answer. And you know what? Still, Jesus didn't refuse to answer. Instead, he kept on talking with them. He kept answering. He wanted them to truly learn, understand, and believe that he was exactly who he said he was, the Son of God. Now, towards the end of this exchange, Jesus simply said this: "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." I love this verse because it's so important to our faith. Now, come here. Let's talk real quick. Maybe you're struggling right now because you feel like your faith is being held back or limited by the questions you have. But I think it's just the opposite. The more you pursue what's true, the more you'll understand what is true. That's what Jesus is talking about here. And if we want to grow our faith, we want our faith to grow, we have to ask those questions. We have to learn. We have to use our minds to discover what's true about God. And when we do, we'll find the freedom to grow in our faith. You see, your faith doesn't have to be based on feeling alone. In fact, it shouldn't be, because feelings change all the time. But what's true about God? That God never changes. And that means that you can have faith because of what you've questioned and learned to be true. Now remember, learning about God is a way to connect with God. It's a way to love him with our minds. It's a part of the process. We're never, ever going to have all the answers to all of our questions. But that's not even the point. In fact, the point is to grow in our relationship with God and to connect with him. And part of that process is learning and asking questions. Because when we pursue what's true, Jesus promises us that we'll find more freedom to keep going and growing our faith. So what do we do with all the questions we have about faith in God and all this Jesus stuff? Well, I think the best thing we can do is actually be bold and start asking him. This week, pick one area of your faith where you wish you knew more. Maybe it's a specific story in the Bible that you've heard about or don't really understand. Or maybe it's a characteristic of God that you want to know more about. Maybe it's an event from Scripture that you aren't sure you truly understand or even believe. Or maybe it's a habit like prayer that you don't totally believe works. Whatever it is, focus on just one part of this whole faith thing you aren't sure about. And you know what you should do after that? Ask your questions. Get them out of your head, maybe write them down all in one place. Then take a step toward pursuing what's true and learning more about that area of your faith this week. Maybe talk to your small group leader or read a little more in your Bible about it. Or maybe just simply pray that God would show you how you can learn more about what you aren't necessarily sure of. You can even talk to someone a little older and further along in their faith journey about your questions and your doubts, someone who will help point you to what's true. And just see what happens. I promise that you aren't the first person ever who ever asked those questions, and you certainly won't be the last. The more you learn about God and discover what's true about Him, the more freedom you'll find as you grow and connect with Him. If you remember one thing from today, remember this. Look up here, pay attention. Learning about God is a way to connect with God. So don't be afraid to dive in, ask questions, and start learning more about what's true. And as you head out, think about this. What's one question I have about God?